The great chamber of the Imperial High Council loomed above the gathered officials, its vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of conquest. The room itself, a towering monolith of white marble and dark obsidian, was meant to impress and intimidate, as was the Empire's way. At the center of it all, seated upon a throne carved from the fused remains of vanquished warships, was High Lord Varkas. His crimson robes pooled around him like spilled blood, his fingers idly tapping the armrest as he regarded the frail figure kneeling before him. Eric Voss, the old man in question, looked utterly unimpressive. His face, weathered and lined with age, bore no expression of fear. His simple clothing, a threadbare tunic and dark trousers, contrasted starkly with the elaborate uniforms of the imperial elite that surrounded him. He had been dragged before them in chains, as if he were some great rebel leader, rather than a nameless human relic from a dying world. General Kale, standing to Varkas's right, scoffed at the sight of him. This is the one who refused to kneel? This is the man our soldiers spent weeks hunting across the wastelands of Earth. He turned his scarred face toward the throne. My lord, allow me to rectify this insult immediately. Varkas lifted a hand, silencing him. Patience, General. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a ruler accustomed to absolute authority. He leaned forward, studying the prisoner as one might observe an insect. You are Eric Voss, correct? The old man did not answer immediately. His gaze moved across the faces of those assembled, the generals, the advisors, the aristocrats who had never known a day of suffering in their gilded existence. Finally, he exhaled softly. I am. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the chamber. It was the laugh of men who saw no threat, only amusement. You are accused of treason against the Galactic Empire, Varkas continued, his tone one of detached boredom. Your world has fallen. Your armies have been broken. Your people, such as they were, have accepted our rule. Yet you, he gestured vaguely, chose to fight, to resist. A pointless endeavor, wouldn't you say? Eric tilted his head slightly, as if considering the words. You misunderstand. Oh. Varkas arched an eyebrow. Enlighten us, then. The old man's lips curved, not in defiance, but in something deeper, something almost pitying. I did not resist because I thought I could stop you. I resisted because I knew what would come next. General Kale barked a laugh. And what, pray tell, is coming next? Eric met his gaze, unblinking. Your end. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the laughter returned, louder this time. Even Varkas allowed himself a chuckle, shaking his head at the absurdity of it. A single, broken man predicting the fall of an empire that had stood unchallenged for centuries. Ah, you humans, Varkas mused, smiling. Always so dramatic, always clinging to these last, desperate fantasies of vengeance. You think some rebel force lurks in the void? That an unseen army waits beyond the stars to strike us down? He spread his arms. There is nothing. We have taken everything. You are alone. Eric sighed, the sound one of tired patience. You are wrong. Varkas's smile faltered. There was something in the old man's voice, something unsettlingly certain. He glanced at Commander Thaurik, who stood further back, silent and watchful as always. Unlike the others, Thaurik had not laughed. He had observed. The commander took a step forward, arms clasped behind his back. If you are so sure of our downfall, old man, tell us, who is it we should fear? Eric looked at him then, truly looked at him, as if weighing his soul. When he spoke, his voice was almost gentle. You should fear my son. A murmur passed through the council. Some sneered, others merely exchanged amused glances. And who, Varkas drawled, is your son? Eric's smile remained, but now it did not reach his eyes. You will know soon enough. The High Lord exhaled, the amusement fading into irritation. He had entertained this long enough. Enough of this nonsense. Execute him. 2 guards stepped forward, plasma rifles raised. Eric did not move. He did not beg nor plead. He merely closed his eyes, as though listening to something only he could hear. Thaurik frowned. He had spent years studying battlefields, analyzing threats before they surfaced. Something about this man, the way he carried himself, the unshaken certainty in his words, made his instincts whisper of unseen dangers. "My lord," Tharic said carefully, "perhaps we should—" The rifles fired. The old man fell. His body slumped to the cold marble floor, unmoving, lifeless. Varkas sighed, rubbing his temple. "Finally." Kale smirked, nudging the corpse with his boot. "So much for prophecies." Tharic, however, did not move. His gaze remained fixed on the old man's face, watching as the faintest trace of a smile lingered in death. Somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, far beyond the reach of the Empire's vision, something stirred. The void between stars was silent, vast, and empty. At least it should have been. But on the edge of Imperial space, where the light of the core worlds barely reached, something moved. Not a fleet, not a signal, a presence. The Imperial outpost on Drales 4 was small, a mirror in the grand machine of the Empire. A refueling station, a checkpoint for warships passing through the Outer Rim. It had no great strategic value, no planetary defenses beyond a standard orbital array. The officers stationed there had grown complacent. Nothing ever happened on Drales 4. Then the alarms began to scream. Commander Renlo jerked upright in his chair, knocking over a half-finished cup of synthicaf. Red warning lights pulsed across the control room, and a hollow metallic voice repeated the same phrase over and over. Unidentified anomaly detected. Unknown energy signature. Proximity breach in 60 seconds. Renlo's hands flew across the console. Where's the reading coming from? The sensor officer, a pale man with nervous eyes, swallowed hard. Directly ahead, sir. But there's no ship. Renlo frowned. No ship. The officer shook his head. Nothing on scans. No hull, no engines, no mass displacement. Then how the hell is it triggering a proximity alarm? The officer didn't answer, because at that moment, the station's exterior cameras went black. Every single one. Simultaneously. A chill crept up Renlo's spine. Restore visuals now. Static. Then, for a fraction of a second, an image flickered onto the screen. A figure. A lone man, standing in the vastness of space. No suit, no ship. Just a silhouette against the cold abyss. Then the image was gone. The lights inside the station flickered. The hum of machinery stuttered. A deep vibration ran through the walls, shaking the floor beneath their feet. Renlo's pulse thundered. Full security lockdown. All personnel. The doors to the command center slid open with a whisper. A man stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a long dark coat that barely moved as he walked. His hair was black as deep space, his face sharp and expressionless. But it was his eyes that silenced the room. They were silver, not metallic, not reflective, but radiant as if something vast and unknowable burned behind them. The guards raised their weapons. Freeze. He did not. A flick of his fingers, a motion so small it was barely perceptible, and every weapon in the room disassembled midair. Not fired, not destroyed, taken apart. Screws, barrels, and power cells hung in the air for a breath, then fell to the floor in a harmless cascade of metal. The man kept walking. Renlo couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He had seen power before, warships that could shatter moons, weapons that could turn cities to dust. This was different. This was not technology. This was something else. The man stopped in front of him. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Where is my father?" Renlo's throat was dry. "Who?" A pause. Then the man tilted his head just slightly. A whisper of a sound, metal groaning. Renlo gasped, his lungs suddenly constricted, his ribs bending inward as if the very air around him had become hostile. He had no choice. He choked out the words. Elysium Prime. Executed. The pressure vanished. Renlo collapsed to his knees, gasping. Around the room, his officers stood frozen, terror writ across their faces. The man didn't move. He stood still, silent, unreadable. Then, in a voice as calm as drifting ash, he spoke 2 words. "I see." Then the station began to die. The walls shuddered, not from an explosion, but from absence. Metal vanished, entire sections of the station simply ceasing to exist. Airlocks crumpled inward, consoles flickered out, gravity itself trembled. Renlo's last thought, as the floor beneath him dissolved into nothing, was that the Empire had made a mistake far greater than it could ever comprehend. Darien Voss turned away from the crumbling wreckage, stepping through a rift that had not been there before. He had his answer. Now, there was only one thing left to do. The fleet arrived at Sigma Prime in perfect formation, a wall of steel and firepower stretching across the void. 20 warships, each a marvel of Imperial engineering, bristling with weapons that had reduced entire civilizations to dust. General Kale stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, arms crossed behind his back, eyes locked onto the tactical display. The anomaly, the man, was coming. They had seen what happened at Draelis 4. They had heard the garbled transmissions, the whispers of an enemy that should not exist. But Kale was not a man given to fear. The Empire did not fear. The Empire destroyed. Energy spike detected, the sensor officer announced, voice tight. Sector 5. Kale's jaw clenched. There was no ship, no fleet, just a man. A lone figure stepping into reality, as though the vacuum of space were a mere inconvenience. Darien Voss. He drifted there between the stars and the fleet, suspended in the void without a suit, without propulsion. His long coat billowed as if caught in a breeze that did not exist, silver eyes reflecting the light of distant suns. Kale felt the weight of the moment press against his chest. He had fought wars, led invasions, crushed insurrections. He had never seen anything like this. Fire. The command was immediate. The fleet obeyed. 1,000 beams of searing plasma lanced through the void, a cascade of destruction that should have been inescapable. The firepower unleashed in that moment could have sterilized a planet's surface, could have turned cities into craters. The light alone outshone the stars. And yet, the man did not move. The weapons struck nothing. Not shield, not armor, nothing. It was as if reality itself had rejected the attack, as if the void had swallowed the energy before it could touch him. The bright, searing fury of the empires might simply cease to be. The bridge was silent. No alarms, no shouts, only the heavy, suffocating weight of disbelief. Kale exhaled slowly. Redirect all power to... The void trembled. Not space, not the fleet's instruments, but something deeper, something unseen. The warships groaned, their titanic hulls creaking as an unseen force pushed against them. The very stars around them seemed to distort, as if reality itself was being bent, twisted by the presence of a single man. Then the fleet collapsed, not exploded, not torn apart, collapsed. One by one, the warships folded inward, their structures bending, imploding as though consumed by a gravity well too immense to comprehend. Bulkheads shrieked as they were crushed, entire decks flattened in the span of a heartbeat. The Indomitable lurched violently, claxons wailing, and Kale barely caught himself before he was thrown to the floor. All ships are. The officer's voice was strangled, cut off by the sheer impossibility of what was happening. Kale watched, helpless as his fleet, the pride of the Empire, became nothing, and Darien Voss descended. Sigma Prime was a fortress world, its surface a vast sprawl of military installations, orbital cannons, and impenetrable citadels. It had stood for centuries as an unbreakable bastion of imperial might. Now it trembled. He touched down on the surface without a sound, the earth beneath his feet fracturing outward like ripples in a still pond. Soldiers swarmed, armored divisions rolling forward, gunships screaming through the sky. They did not hesitate. They fired. It made no difference. The bullets, the lasers, the missiles, none of it reached him. The very laws of physics seemed to deny their existence, erasing them before they could fulfill their purpose. He walked forward, unhurried, untouched. A tank fired. The blast meant to level a city block, reached him, then stopped. Not upon impact, not upon meeting resistance. It simply ceased to exist, the explosion vanishing as if it had never been. The soldiers did not have time to run. A pulse, invisible yet inescapable, rippled outward. Men screamed as their bodies disintegrated, dissolving into dust before their minds could comprehend their own deaths. Vehicles crumpled, their armor folding like paper, their engines collapsing inward like dying stars. Darien continued forward. Inside the command center, high above the devastation, Governor Hauros watched the horror unfold. His hands shook against the control panel. He had seen planetary invasions before. He had watched legions march, had seen orbital bombardments reduce continents to rubble. But this was not war. This was erasure. He turned to his officers, voice frantic. "We have to." The walls split. Not broken. Split. A jagged, impossible wound tore through the command center, as if reality itself had been severed. The air turned heavy, oppressive, wrong. Hauros stumbled backward as he stepped inside. The silver eyes locked onto him. "Sigma Prime," Darien said, his voice neither loud nor soft, neither angry nor calm. A voice beyond such things. "Your world is chosen." The floor beneath them shattered. The sky itself darkened. And Sigma Prime, the Empire's most fortified world, began to die. The Imperial throne room was silent, a silence not of peace, but of waiting. Shadows pooled beneath towering pillars, the air thick with the weight of impending doom. High Lord Varkas stood before his throne, his crimson robes draped around him like the last embers of a dying fire. The golden sigil of the Empire gleamed against his chest, but it felt lighter than it once had, as if the weight of power had begun to slip from his grasp. The war was no longer one of conquest or suppression. It was survival. The Empire's fleets had been reduced to whispers, their greatest generals consumed by a force beyond understanding. Entire planets had fallen, not conquered, not occupied, but erased. Cities vanished without a trace, fortresses crumbled like sand. And at the center of it all was him. Darien Voss had not called for surrender. He had not issued demands. He simply moved forward, relentless as the tide, inevitable as the end of stars. Varkas exhaled slowly. Not yet. The Empire was not dead yet. Before him, the last remnants of his war council stood in rigid formation. General Kale, bruised and battered, his once pristine uniform torn, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. Commander Thauric, silent as ever, though there was something different in his gaze now, understanding, perhaps, or resignation. Beyond them, the last of the Imperial Guard lined the throne room walls. They were the best soldiers in the galaxy, warriors who had never known defeat. And yet their hands gripped their weapons a little too tightly, their breathing a little too shallow. They had seen what was coming. The doors opened. There was no explosion, no grand entrance. Just a whisper of movement, a shift in the air, and he was there. Darien stepped into the throne room. His dark coat, unmoving despite the unseen currents that seemed to ripple around him. His silver eyes swept across the chamber, not with malice, not with hatred, with inevitability. The guards raised their weapons. It did not matter. With a single glance, the rifles in their hands unmade themselves, breaking apart into their base components, screws and barrels clattering uselessly to the floor. No one moved. Varkas took a step forward, keeping his voice measured. "You are Darien Voss." Darien inclined his head. A simple acknowledgement. "You have waged war against my empire," Varkas continued. "You have destroyed our fleets, wiped out our strongholds. Tell me, what is it you want?" For the first time, Darien spoke. "What?" Varkas nodded. "Power? Dominion? A throne of your own? If it is war you seek, you have already won. There is nothing left to fight. Tell me what you want, and we may yet find an accord." Darien tilted his head slightly. Then, softly, he said, "I want you to understand." Varkas frowned. "Understand what?" Darien took another step forward, and the room shifted. The air grew heavy, the walls seeming to press inward, the very concept of space bending beneath a force beyond comprehension. The flickering torches dimmed. Not from lack of fuel, but because light itself hesitated in his presence. "You built an empire on the illusion of strength. Darian said, his voice neither loud nor soft, neither cold nor warm. You believed power was measured in warships and armies, in control and conquest. But true power. He raised a hand, fingers curling slightly. General Kale collapsed, his armor folding inward, his breath vanishing before he could scream. His body did not break. It did not bleed. It simply ceased to be, as though it had never existed at all. A ripple of horror passed through the room. The guards froze, their instincts demanding action even as their minds knew it was useless. Darian lowered his hand. True power is knowing how small you truly are. Varkas clenched his fists. And what does that make you? Darian met his gaze, silver eyes deep as the void. The end. The room trembled. The palace shuddered. The throne behind Varkas cracked, not from force, but from a sheer weight of something vast, something unseen, pressing against the very fabric of reality. Varkas took a slow breath. Then, I will not kneel. Darian nodded once, a motion almost of respect. I never asked you to. And the empire ended. The sky above Elysium Prime shattered. Not with fire, not with warships, with absence. A crack ran through the heavens, jagged and immense, revealing something beyond the fabric of reality itself. A place without light, without form, without limits. The capital of the empire, the heart of its dominion, stood beneath a wound in existence, and for the first time in its long history, the world knew fear. Darian Voss stood upon the obsidian steps of the imperial citadel, his silver eyes reflecting the silent apocalypse unfolding above. The air trembled around him, waves of unseen force rolling outward, unmaking everything they touched. Towers crumbled into dust without a sound. Streets rippled and dissolved, their materials unraveling, stripped down to their most basic elements, and then less than that. It was not destruction. It was not decay. It was removal. The citizens of Elysium Prime had no time to flee. Those who ran found the ground vanishing beneath them, their bodies breaking apart before they could scream. Others simply ceased, blinking out of existence as though they had never been. Darian walked forward. The palace gates, once a marvel of impenetrable design, rusted, cracked, and finally dispersed, pulled apart by the sheer presence of something they could not withstand. Varkas had been the final thread binding this empire to the illusion of permanence. With his fall, the foundation of power crumbled. There were no more rulers, no more generals, no more gods of steel and fire. There was only the end. The throne room was gone. The city was gone. The empire itself, its borders once stretching across 1,000 worlds, was nothing more than a fading echo in Darian's wake. Yet he did not stop. His path led beyond the ruins, beyond the world, beyond the reach of any who still remembered what had been. The crack in the sky widened as he approached, its edges trembling, fraying at the seams of reality. The stars beyond flickered and twisted, their once eternal light bending, dimming, disappearing. For a brief moment, something whispered. Not words, not thoughts. Something older, deeper, something that had always been waiting just beyond the edge of comprehension. Darian stepped forward. The rift widened, swallowing him whole, and the universe trembled.